Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy, Nerd Mode On, and welcome to episode 10 of Battle Reports, a video series where I'll be going over a particular weapon in Battlefield 4 and breaking down the statistics of the weapon to provide you guys with a better idea of how the weapon is going to perform. So without further ado, let's get started. So for today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Ace 52 CQB. Now this weapon does have a 650 rounds per minute, which does make it the slowest, competing with the G36C as well as the Type 95B1. Now alongside that information, this weapon does have a 400 meters a second velocity, which does make it the slowest of all the carbines in its particular category, so you're going to have to be compensating a little bit more for moving targets or even in many cases long range targets. So compensating for the overall distance is going to be a little strugglesome at the initial stages of learning this weapon. Now of course, transferring your guys' eyes over to the damage model, you'll notice that this weapon does a maximum damage of 34 damage up until 8 meters. Now of course, after 8 meters you're going to see a gradual decline of the overall damage being outputted at range, and the minimum damage that this weapon can do is 20, and that's achieved at 50 meters. Now what that really comes down to is this weapon can 3-shot you at close range, or at the most long range, especially at 50 plus meters, you're going to notice that it's going to take about 5 bullets, which really isn't that bad considering that this weapon is a powerhouse compared to its competitors in its similar category, and if you wish to look at it, it's kind of like a mini Scar H in many cases. Now with that said, taking a look at the reload speed as well as the magazine size, this will give us some useful information, especially when it comes down to combat situations that you guys might find yourself in on a consistent basis. So this weapon does have a short reload of 2.2 seconds, which is actually pretty moderate in comparison to a lot of its competitors. It's not better than some, but at the same expense, it's not worse than others, so it's pretty average when it comes down to it, and I guess that's a good thing, especially with the overall clocking speeds of the reload. Now of course, the long reload is clocking in at 3.1 seconds, which is actually pretty moderate. Again, nothing too special there, but by all means, it's definitely better than some and worse than others, so it can definitely be pretty useful to have a gun, and especially in these situations, at least you're not achieving the maximum reload speed, so I guess that's a good thing in many cases. Now of course, moving over to the magazine size, you guys will notice that this weapon does have a 25 round magazine plus one in the chamber. Of course, you're going to add those both together to get a combined ammunition count of 26, which is actually pretty decent considering that this weapon does a lot more damage in comparison to its competitors. It's the main reason why this weapon had to have some deductions, considering that the round is a little bit larger in those particular cases. And finally, transferring your guys' eyes over to the recoil numbers. These are the most potent information that you'll run into contact with, considering that you guys will either be suppressing the opposition or in many cases downing the opposition to the point where they have to go back to the respawn screen. So of course, taking a look at the horizontal side of things, you guys will notice that this weapon does have a left pole of 0.25 as well as a right pole of 0.25. Now of course, with that said, the verticality of this weapon when it comes down to recoil numbers is 0.45, which does mean it's going to be kicking a lot more vertically than it is any other direction, and the easiest way to compensate for this weapon, considering that the horizontal numbers are equivalent to each other, is to just simply pull down. Now it is also worth noting that this weapon does have a first shot multiplier of 2.3, which is going to really affect that vertical recoil, especially if you're going to be peppering the trigger. In many cases, you're going to be noticing that the recoil is pretty sufficient. However, this weapon is pretty easy to compensate for just by pulling down on the analog stick or the mouse, depending on what platform you're playing on, so you shouldn't have too many problems with that. But in conclusion, I would say this weapon is very similar to the Scar H or the Bulldog in many cases. However, the assault rifles do differ quite a bit from the carbines, but by the damage model itself, you do see some very interesting comparisons between the weapons. So in many cases, you can use this weapon in those circumstances and you should be fairly effective. But anyway, guys, this has been this episode of Battle Reports. I hope you guys found some of the information useful, and of course, if you guys would like to recommend a weapon for next week, feel free to let me know in the comments below, considering that I do take your guys' submissions as priority one. But until the next episode, guys, this has been NMO, and I'm going to be signing out. Peace.